Hello, Blues, and welcome to the Manchester is Blue Show. I'm Neil, and I will be taking you through a tactical analysis of our Champions League final against Chelsea. All of the images that you'll be seeing are from my piece for Sportslens. The link to that will be below, so make sure to check that out as well. So, yeah, let's get right into it. First of all, let's take a look at the lineups. Our formation here is given as a 4-3-3, but that's quite nominal, so let's just ignore it. Obviously, Ederson in goal. A back four was as expected: Walker, Stones, Diaz, Zinchenko. The big surprise was in midfield, where we had Bernardo Silva and Phil Foden, but even more surprisingly, no defensive midfielder. So it was Ilkay Gundogan who was at the very center of it. And our front three also had a surprise. De Bruyne as a false nine, Mahrez as the right winger. These two were expected, but Raheem Sterling got a start. And obviously that was also not predicted. The most of the predicted lineups had Foden as the left winger, but well, Pep as always threw a curveball. For Chelsea, it was their usual 3-4-2-1, which they've used to quite a good effect under Tuchel. So Mendy in goal, Aspilicueta, Thiago Silva, Antonio Rudiger forming the back three. Reece James and Ben Chilwell on either side. N'Golo Conte and Jorginho forming a double pivot in midfield, and the front three was Kai Havertz, Mason Mount, and Timo Werner. So a pretty standard lineup from Chelsea, nothing new from them. But obviously for us, big surprises all around. And even when the lineups were announced, there was talk of Pep Guardiola's overthinking and all of that. But personally, what from what I've noticed is the bigger the match, the greater the chance of Pep pulling some of his experiments. And well, some might say that we kept it simple in our Champions League run up to the final, but I have to disagree, because if you look at our match against PSG, it was not a 4-3-3, but it was more of a 4-4-2/4-2-4, which was quite different from the usual 3-2-2-3 we have when in possession. So, well, that worked, and at that time there were no talks of Pep overthinking. So, same thing against Dortmund and Gladbach. At that, in those matches, we had like a 4-2-3-1, and with the use of a false nine in a couple of occasions. So that was quite interesting as well. And again, at that time, Pep was a tactical genius. Against Tottenham in the League Cup, we also had another sort of a 4-2-4, but the difference was that our all of our attackers were split to the wings, and there was no one centrally. So we were targeting the wide areas and Tottenham's fullbacks. And again, tactical genius from Pep. Even the thing with Pep is he's been doing this ever since he started. So if you go all the way back to his Barcelona days, and well, the famous 2009 El Clasico at the Santiago Bernabeu, when Barcelona had lost a couple of their matches, so their nearly inassailable title race lead had dropped just to 4 points, while Real were hot on their heels now, and they needed to win to get a 7 point lead and get back in complete control of the race. And this was the point where Pep Guardiola pulled off his first false nine, and obviously Barcelona ended up winning 2-6, and that was a master stroke. But in this case, Pep did not use a defensive midfielder, used Raheem Sterling on the left, and he's overthinking. Had we won, it might have been a master stroke. So with Pep, the thing is, you're always going to get experiments. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But it's almost a certainty that for big games, Pep will change things up to surprise not just us, the fans, but also more importantly, the opponents. Because I'm sure Chelsea or Tuchel did not see Sterling starting, or certainly not us completely not using any defensive midfielder at all. So with that said, let's start our breakdown of the match. First of all, we'll take a look at how we operated with the ball, our system in possession, which was different again from the 3-2-2-3 that was standard for us for most of 2021. So we had a sort of a 3-1-3-3 with a kite shape or a diamond shape in midfield. So this was made, obviously the back three was Walker, Stones, and Diaz, but in midfield, we had Zinchenko moving into an inverted role. So Gundogan at the tip, Bernardo Silva on the other side, and Foden at the attacking tip of the kite. And so he got here from his role on the left of midfield. And with the front three, we had the wingers, Mahrez and Sterling on this side is out of frame, but they were holding their width as far as possible and also staying as high up as possible to stretch the Chelsea back line and keep them pinned with the wing backs. And so this is where I think the first mistake was made, which was in this 3-1-3-3 kite midfield system. I would personally have preferred the use of a striker, because if you look here, with Foden at the tip of this kite, uh, De Bruyne, who would have ideally been a false nine, does not have any space to drop into in midfield, as you can see here, because um, Foden is already occupying that space. And if De Bruyne is effectively, he's working as a striker because is next to Thiago Silva, who's the furthest back Chelsea defender, and he's the furthest forward attacker, because if you look at Mahrez on the right, he's pretty much in line with Foden. So this is a position that you would expect a striker like Aguero or Jesus to take up. But it's not something you would want from a person of the quality of Kevin De Bruyne, who can do so much in the build up. And obviously his involvement in the game naturally was severely impacted. So he only had 37 touches. Well, he did go off in the 60th minute because of that injury. But the man who replaced him, Jesus, he got 22 touches as a striker. Obviously, there were other factors involved, such as the fact that we changed our system soon thereafter. Um, Chelsea were defending because they had the 1-0 lead, so they were defending for deeper, whereas we were attacking further. That might not be as representative as you want, but there's no doubt that the use of a striker in this 3-1-3-3 system would have been wiser. Moving on, if you look at if you try to understand what we were trying to do with this system, it was central penetration. So Chelsea's defense was in the shape of a 5-2-3, and their main gaps, obviously, with just a two-man midfield, were in the center of the pitch. So what we could do with four men in midfield was overload them here and play right through them. So if you look at this instance, with Stones in possession, you can see that Bernardo Silva at the top of your screen is free to receive a pass. Ilkay Gundogan in the middle is free, and Zinchenko is also quite free. So if he goes to Diaz, who would immediately find him, then there are three easy ball progression options available for us, and this was our plan, to try and play through Chelsea right through the middle as opposed to attacking their wings. And this would have worked, but Chelsea, they were quite smart. Initially, as you can see in this image, their 5-2-3 was more of a mid block, which ended about at the edge of their attacking third, where Werner is right now. But they noticed what we were trying to do, and they quite quickly started dropping much deeper into their own half. So this 5-2-3 is very compact. There's no space between the lines for anyone to receive. Werner started effectively man marking Gundogan, so he was no longer a passing option. There's, as you can see here, there's very little space in the very center of midfield. So Zinchenko and Bernardo Silva both had to split out wide. As we were using De Bruyne up front, he usually occupied Aspilicueta or Thiago Silva, and Phil Foden took the other center back of the two, which meant that Antonio Rudiger was usually free. Not in this instance because Mahrez is back, and that's caused a few positional rotations. But in most cases, Chelsea's free center back was Antonio Rudiger, and he was able to move into midfield and track Bernardo Silva. So if you notice, Bernardo Silva, he had a poor game and he didn't really do much. He had very few touches, only 27 touches, I believe, and his involvement was very limited. So this meant that Zinchenko was the man who had most of the ball for us, and that's proven by the stats. He had 109 touches, which was more than any other player in this match. And he wasn't necessarily bad, but he lacks the creativity which the likes of De Bruyne or Foden would have. And his main ball progression option obviously was Raheem Sterling, and Sterling didn't have a great game against Reece James, who made 7 tackles and was absolutely rock solid at the back. So in this way, our ball progression was very limited and stifled by Chelsea. And we only really had one way to move, which was through Zinchenko and Sterling. And obviously, as we said, James was usually able to block that off. So with sustained possession, we were able to create next to nothing against Chelsea. So they did quite well, but we weren't so good. Now, the next big issue for us was our lack of defensive midfielder. So this hurt us most in transition. Now the rationale behind this might have been that Chelsea don't have a number 10 per se, right? They have two wide attackers and a striker, but not a number 10. So you would think that a defensive midfielder would not be able to man mark one player out of the game. But with Gundogan as the deepest midfielder, we didn't really have any defensive solidity because he very often strayed forward. And this meant that if Chelsea turned possession over, as they did in this case where De Bruyne was tackled, he's on the ground here, and then there would be absolute acres of space in midfield. So you can see Gundogan, he's been highlighted, and you would want him to be somewhere over here where the arrow is pointing, right? You'd want him to be somewhere here so that he, with Conte on the ball, he might be able to block him off or cut off the runs made by some of the other attackers. But since he's here, uh, on behind the man in possession, which is N'Golo Conte, he's he's not going to be able to stop the attack. So effectively, what we're up against is a 4-on-3, and that's not what you want against a side which has the individual quality which Chelsea possess in their attack. This was a recurring problem. Look, here's another example. Again, Ilkay Gundogan is acres away from where he should be. You'd want him to be somewhere here, right? Trying to close down the space in midfield. But you can see that we effectively have, from the edge of the our defensive third to almost the halfway line, we have no players, and Chelsea again have all the space in the world to transition and directly run at our back four. Even in open play, right? This is a structured Chelsea attack. It's not what you'd call a transition situation. But again, you can see Gundogan has been pulled out of position because N'Golo Conte made this run. He dragged him away. And now, with that done, there's again acres of space in midfield. So if Reece James wants to find Timo Werner or Kai Havertz here, then he can easily make a simple side foot pass, and Chelsea are in the center at the edge of our box. So again, uh, our lack of defensive midfielder really hurt us against Chelsea in transition. Another reason for this was I felt that we were slightly impatient in possession. Like usually with Manchester City, you see us circulating possession around the back, waiting for everyone to get into structure. But whenever we won the ball back in the defensive third or whatever, we immediately bombed forward. And you saw those with Sterling or De Bruyne dribbling against Aspilicueta or James. And I think that worsened our lack of defensive midfielder because we were stretching the game in both sides. So we were transitioning from defense to attack, and then if we lost the ball, back from attack to defense. And obviously, in this way, when you don't have a regular defensive midfielder, your midfield is bound to be exposed at some point. So our style of play did not really suit our tactical thought process with the lack of defensive midfielder. So I think that did not help in any way. But with that being said, the equally big problem, in my opinion, was our pressing structure. So if you cast your minds back to our FA Cup tie against Chelsea, which was the first time that we faced Tuchel in the Premier League, we played in like a 4-2-3-1 for our pressing at least. And how that worked was against a back three. Our striker would press the central defender, the wingers would press the wing backs or the wide center backs, and this left De Bruyne, who was our number 10 in that match, against a double pivot in midfield. So Chelsea easily broke right through the center. They played through us from the middle. So what we tried to do here was press in a 4-1-2-3 shape. And here what we did is we matched their 3 to build up structure man for man effectively. So you can see Sterling took Aspilicueta, De Bruyne, Thiago Silva, Riyad Mahrez, Antonio Rudiger, and in midfield we had Foden and Bernardo Silva on Conte and Jorginho respectively. So this pretty much stopped Chelsea from playing centrally, but it opened up their wing backs. And you can see in this image they have absolute acres of space on the wings, and with our wingers occupied with their centre backs, they were never going to be able to track back and get in position to stop them from advancing. So whenever they played long balls like this to the wing back, our fullbacks would have to step up and meet them. Now, as a result, the knock-on effect here was that our defenders, our back four, would get isolated. So this is after this pass was played by Thiago Silva to James, and then James had the ball. So Zinchenko met him by running and closing him down. Then this in turn allowed Havertz, Chelsea's right-sided attacker, to be free. So then Ruben Diaz had to mark him, and Havertz dragged him wide with this run. And now what that leaves is John Stones with Timo Werner and Kyle Walker with Mason Mount on the top of your screen. So we were effectively, all of our defenders were very isolated. They weren't able to play together, but rather had to keep fighting their individual duels. And in defense, you can win 10 duels, but if you lose one, that one duel could be a goal, and the 10 you won, they at the end of the day, they're not going to be worth anything on the score line, right? So even if you lose one duel, you are in trouble, which is why whenever you're defending, your defensive structure's main primary objective is to prevent such isolation and such individual duels. But we could not do that. And as you can see here, James played the ball forward to Werner, who then could use his pace against John Stones. And obviously, if you look at the goal was created directly as a result of this. So it started with Chelsea playing to the left, right? So what they did is Mendy had the ball, he went to Christensen, then Christensen waited on it, and then he put it right back to Mendy. Now what this did is it shifted our defense to the left. So if you notice here, you can see that most of our shape, it's biased to the left because we were shifted like that. And then quickly thereafter, Mendy sprung a crossfield ball to Chilwell, who was obviously in space, as we saw with the pressing structure issues. So now, with him receiving the ball, Kyle Walker would have to go and try and close him down instead of worrying about Mason Mount. And obviously, this in turn results in Mason Mount being free, and he could receive the ball with a fair amount of space. Would a defensive midfielder have solved this issue? I don't believe that, because even if it was Fernandinho, you would expect him to be in this sort of a region when we were shifted out to the right. And Mason Mount is clearly not in this region. So I don't think the goal in itself would have been prevented by using a defensive midfielder. A lot of other issues might have been solved, but not the goal. The goal was a direct result of our poor pressing structure. And yeah, so then Mount receives the ball, and then here is where I thought John Stones made a bit of a mistake. So if you look at him here, he's standing over here next to Walker effectively, instead of closing Mount down. If we go back to the last example which we took, so Diaz over here has tracked Havertz out wide, and he has closed him down here, right? You can have a here. This is Diaz and this is Havertz. So he's moved out and he's tried to close him down. So in the event that Havertz received the ball here, he would not have been allowed to turn because Diaz was on his back. But in this case, Mount is allowed to turn because Stones is not close to him, right? He's standing over here. Now him not closing down Mount could have been excused had he been in line with Zinchenko and Diaz. So if he stayed in the defensive line, you could understand why he didn't go there. But over here, John Stones is, well, the embodiment of man's just here in it, because he's not stopping Mount. He's not going to be able to track Werner. He's just there. And if you take him out of the situation, the same play happens with the Mount through ball and Havertz latching onto it. And again, this was the result of isolation, because if you look at Werner, he made this run out wide, dragging Diaz away. So this took Diaz out of position. He took Diaz away with him to our right wing, and this left a lot of space centrally for Havertz to run into. And again, as I said, if John Stones was in the back line, if John Stones was somewhere here, then Diaz would not have to go with Werner, because he'd know that Stones will pick him up. So then Diaz could have been able to stay in the center and prevent the ball being played right through our defense. But obviously that was not the case, and Havertz latched onto it, beat Ederson, and scored. And yeah, one thing I'd like to touch upon is Ederson. His one-on-one ability against such deep runners, I think it's a bit questionable. So in this case, I don't have an image, but if you remember, Ederson came out of the box. He tried to make a slide tackle, but completely failed, and Havertz went around him. Now, most goalkeeping coaches will advise you that when there's such a long through ball, he's effectively playing it from his own half, right? When there's such a long through ball being played, the attacker Havertz is, well, there's not much of a chance of him doing a first time finish, and his first touch is going to be a bit tricky with the pace on the ball. So what you do as a goalkeeper is you stand at the edge of the box and let the attacker take the first touch, and then make your move, try and slide into him and hold on to the ball, grasp it, right? But Ederson, and if you think back to the Chelsea Arsenal game, if any of you've watched that, there was a point in, I think, the first half where Havertz, the man who scored against us, stole the ball of an Arsenal centre back. I think it was Pablo Mari. Went one on one with the keeper with no one near him, but the keeper stayed inside his box, asked Havertz to make a decision for himself, and then Havertz ended up skying it. He put it over the crossbar, and well, that was a pressure situation. This, though, is a Champions League final. So if you let the attacker make a decision, as opposed to making it for him by sliding and letting him go around you, you might have had a better chance of saving it. But the main blame for this goal cannot be given to an individual. The main issue was our pressing structure, and that was one of the many things that we got wrong on this day. Um, but one thing I'd like to touch upon, which is not really related to us, but it's related to Chelsea, is Timo Werner's involvement. So this decoy run he's made, is something that I don't see too many forwards doing, and this is what Werner excels at, and this is why he keeps playing, even though he missed a couple of huge chances against us. Scoffed, I think, a cutback, and then another one he put it straight into Ederson's hands. But these runs he makes, he doesn't get an assist for this. He doesn't get any sort of credit for this run, but this is the run that makes the goal. And this is why Timo Werner was signed by Chelsea. This is what he did at Leipzig with Paulsen. And this is why I believe if he starts scoring, and it's not if, it's when, because if you look at his underlying numbers with the XG, he's doing a fair job and he could have more goals. So when he starts scoring, Werner is going to be a big problem, and I'd say could be top two, top three strikers in the Premier League. And if we think about next season, where we'll have obviously another title race, where I feel Chelsea will be our rivals. If they have an informed team of Werner, trust me, they're going to be a serious problem. Because if this guy scores goals and makes runs like these to create goals, Chelsea will find goals, and that's one of their problems right now. You look at the Arsenal match, you look at the FA Cup final, their problem was their lack of creativity. But when Werner does runs like these and even starts finishing, I tell you, Chelsea are going to be a problem. And not just this for Werner. You look at his work rate, runs into the channel like these, chasing a lost cause like this, clearance effectively. This sort of work rate is what is why Tuchel keeps persisting with him even when he doesn't get goals. And you can't teach this or try and coach it into him. This sort of work rate is what is one of Timo Werner's characteristics, and that is why he keeps playing for Chelsea. But going back to us, well, our tactics were obviously questionable. Our choice of not using a defensive midfielder was equally questionable. It didn't work out in the end, clearly. Pep even brought on Fernandinho in the 64th minute when we actually needed a goal. So he brought on a defensive midfielder when a goal was required. So well, he in a way there he admitted his mistake, but by that time the damage was done and could not be repaired. But I would not solely blame Pep Guardiola for this, because well, our players' performances might have been impacted with a new tactical system, but they were nowhere near the level of a Champions League final. The only player who I thought I would say performed well was Kyle Walker, with his late crosses late on in the match and just overall recoveries in the first half. The attacking quality he brought with his overlapping runs. He was the only man who looked up for a Champions League final. Everyone else, whether it's through a tactical issue like De Bruyne or just performance-wise, like well, effectively any other player, they were not up to it. Whereas for Chelsea, they were absolutely brilliant. All of their players, you have to give them at least a 7.5 or 8 on 10. And everywhere you look in their defensive line, their centre backs were solid. Silva went off injured, but Andreas Christensen came on for him on his first match after the injury picked up against us in the league. He was absolutely rock solid. Obviously, Reece James, we already touched upon 7 tackles in a Champions League final. Ben Chilwell was great too. I think with the switches we saw with Mendy playing passes into him. He was brilliant dealing with that. He kept Maris quiet as well, although he didn't need to do much there. Then again, in midfield, obviously, I'm sure you've heard this a billion times now, but N'Golo Conte was absolutely sensational. This is a bit cliched, but he quite literally did the work of two men in midfield, and obviously they still had Jorginho. That guy was he was on another level, and those are the type of performances you need in a Champions League final. That is sometimes could win you a Champions League final, even if you get something wrong tactically. So we didn't get that. We didn't get the right tactics either, in my opinion. Whereas Chelsea were, I think they don't get the credit that they deserve, because yes, we made a few mistakes, but you have to give credit to Tuchel and Chelsea. They stuck to what their best, and they adapted to us as well with their defensive line, with their structure of the build up, where they tried to find their wing backs. They were very quick to adapt to a new system played by us, and they well on the 90 minutes of the match, they thoroughly deserved this Champions League victory. But I don't think we should be too dejected about it. Obviously, it pains massively to lose a Champions League final. But well, only two teams a season can get to that stage, and we were one of them for the first time in our history. So I'd say that's something to be proud of. And well, this is not an end really. This is the start of something big, because if you look at our squad, we have so many good young players, or players who are at the peak of their career and are still going to be at the top for 2 or 3 more years. We don't have any aging players in our squad except for Fernandinho, but he's timeless. So I'm sure we will be back in a Champions League final very soon, and we still are Premier League champions. We still have won the Carabao Cup. We've still got more trophies than any other club in England this season, and we're still the best team in the land. So of course, this pains everyone, but let's enjoy this season, enjoy our achievements, and look forward to what will come next season. So that's all for this tactical breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you around for more.